Oh my gosh. Dear noble ones, we've got a lot to talk about today. Get your popcorn, Mr. Scott. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and you know, I've got a little bit of a passion for ancient Rome, so of course I decided to take my wife to the cinema the other day to watch Gladiator E. I think the best way to begin this obnoxious historical analysis would be exactly from the very first thing you see on the big screen. You know, the beginning of the end. We are told that what we're about to see is happening 16 years after, the events of the first movie, as all of the articles were saying? No, it says 16 years after the death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Now that got me puzzled right there, because Marcus Aurelius dies in 180 AD. Therefore, if maths isn't an opinion, we should be in 196 AD. And yet, we've got the two twin, more on that later, brothers, Caracalla and Geta. But they will not get in power until 211, so I'm already having a little bit of a problem here with the chronology. Thus, if we are in 196 AD, then the emperor, singular, should be their dad, Septimius Severus. Okay, but what if that was a typo? Like, literally, it's a Latin name, people get confused. Maybe it's not 16 years after the death of Marcus Aurelius, but it's 16 years after the death of Commodus. Well, Commodus dies in 192 AD, plus 16, we should be in 208, still under Septimius Severus, so I'm confused. Well, Metatron, the answer is obvious. It's only loosely based on history, so of course the dates are going to be a little bit apart, just a few years. Yeah, that's what I thought until I saw the beginning battle scene. Free Numidia, the last bastion of freedom. We have this spectacular battle of epic proportions, showing the Roman fleet descending upon the last independent city of Numidia. Bad Romans, they will not have our freedom. In 211 AD, they already had it since 105 BC. That's when Numidia falls and gets annexed. 3 centuries. That battle, this is nothing. You haven't seen anything. That battle happened 300 years before the setting of this movie. During the so-called Jugurthine Wars with the, leader of the resistance, Jugurtha, who is this guy. Jugurtha armor is actually pretty good. That's the famous trilobate of Sor SF, an armor of Italic origin but found in a Carthaginian tomb. And his hair, shaved on the sides with a crest in the center of the head, is attested in Punic iconography. Also, Mr. Jugurtha does not get eaten by a mutant monkey like in this movie. He actually gets paraded by a triumphant Gaius Marius in Rome so he can show off, and then he gets beheaded. Well, it beats being kicked by a Spartan into a well that ends up in hell. Sorry, Hades, I guess. In fact, those very legions that attack Numidia are not under the command of Mr. Pascal, but they're under the command of Gaius Marius. So, yeah, after I saw that, I realized it. I'm watching Warhammer Fantasy. And if you manage to realize that, you'll enjoy the movie. It's gonna be great. Music, photography, nice. Warhammer Fantasy. I mean, you do get a skull crusher of corn on top of a rhino anyways. I was literally waiting for the gladiator to scream.
Blood for the blood god, skulls for the throne of corn.
Okay, let's see if I can paint very briefly a little bit of an exhaustive picture here. So, we've got Numidia. Now, Numidia would be modern-day Libya, and depending on the period and the size of the kingdom, sometimes it expands a little bit west and east. But just to give you an idea, that, at this time, would have already been Africa Proconsularis, the Roman province, under imperial control. But in general, for further context, if we look at the entirety of the northern strip of Africa, west of Numidia, we've got Mauretania, which was the last independent portion of North Africa incorporated by Emperor Claudius in 42 AD. Once annexed, they will turn into Mauretania Tingitana and Mauretania Caesariensis, modern-day Morocco and Algeria for reference. So if anything, the last bastion of freedom in North Africa would not be Numidia. Therefore, this conflict is both geographically and chronologically impossible. Now let's talk about the two Muppets, shall we? The Emperors, Caracalla and Geta. Let's begin with the casting. I have absolutely no problem with Joseph Quinn being cast as Emperor Geta. That is because we don't know much about Geta anyways, because after his brother Caracalla had him assassinated, spoiler alert I guess, he received a damnatio memoriae. His image was removed from history. A lot of the records were cancelled. Even his face was scrapped from the one image that we have, the Severan Tondo. And the only pieces of information we get are from the Historia Augusta. Problem is that we get contrasting statements in the sense that on one hand we are told that he had a very modest personality. Therefore, this would not be correct, but then again on the same Historia Augusta we're also told that he loved flashy clothes. So, they went for the latter rather than the first. Both would be considered historically accurate because of what we've got, so I have no problems with the way Geta is represented. If anything, the makeup. Why do these emperors wear makeup? That is beyond me. If Ridley Scott wanted to go for an emperor who was wearing makeup, he should have gone for Elagabalus, or Elagabalus, how it's pronounced in Latin. He was wearing makeup. And not because he wanted to look like a woman, simply because those were his customs since he was from Syria. And the Romans did not like that. They poke fun of him the entire time, also because it's part of anti-imperial propaganda. What have you. Wrong emperor for the makeup. But really, let's talk about Fred Hetchinger for Emperor Caracalla. This was a horrible choice. Like, the actor's skill are great. But that's not Caracalla. Emperor Caracalla in Gladiator II is this little spoiled brat who is unsufferable, rich little kid that everyone dislikes, extravagant, very childish, sick in the head, at least for what we are told. At the end of the day, his brother Geta during the movie tells him, well, this sickness that he has in the loins has got to his head, probably a reference to syphilis. Although there is no reference in the historical record that he had that. He also appears to be bisexual, I suppose, because he has got both young men and young women in chains. Emperor Caracalla, as we can see from his busts, was a very manly man. It was a tough guy. According to both Historia Augusta and Cassius Dio, we are told that Caracalla was, open quotes, a man of abrupt manners, fond of cruel gladiatorial games, accustomed to military life, to venationes in the circus, to hunting boar, and lion. Level with me. Does this guy look like someone who would purposely hunt lions? Oh, and don't even get me started on the little freaking monkey. One, no mention of such monkey nor an obsession with a pet in the sources at all. Two, that is a capuchin monkey, a species typical of South America. Buenos dias. Not to mention the scene where he appoints the monkey senator, which clearly didn't happen. Maybe was a reference to alleged Caligula's appointing of a horse mentioned by Suetonius. But then again, I mean, I at this point, I haven't got a clue. Maybe it was Slanish all along. He was also described as vindictive and bloodthirsty. Now, given, you do see a little bit of vindictive here, but it looks more like a child pitching a fit. In fact, when the people are complaining after a certain character gets turned into Hellraiser with arrows, he is hiding, he's afraid, he's like, oh my gosh, the people want my head. Yeah, you know what the real Caracalla did when he heard that people did not like him and contested him in Alexandria of Egypt? Well, according to the sources, once again, he had a severe chunk of the population slaughtered because of it. He was a brutal man. Now, I get it that Mr. Scott really wanted the audience to dislike these two emperors, and who better to dislike than a little spoiled brat that looks like one of those Instagram/TikTok kids that got rich and think they're better than, who do you know who you're talking to, says the kid to the officer. But I think this is a missed opportunity to show a massive contrast between a flashy, more gentle Geta and a brutal, manly, tough guy, Caracalla, who obviously gets Geta murdered for power. Not to mention the real one also got his own wife executed. Oh, this guy. This guy was lovely. Alright, enough about that. I'm done with the emperors. Let's talk about the arena and the sort of beasts that we get. I've got a few things to say. This is going to be a long one. The first fight, which takes place in the arena of Antium, is more of a venatio, where animals are involved, than actual gladiatorial combat, of course. The prisoners captured in battle are forced to face what appears to be baboons, mutated, baboons. Now, given several species of monkeys were known by the Romans. From Pliny we learned that, for example, Pompey had already exhibited several in his inauguration of his theatre in 55 BC. Also, Pliny does mention that the so-called cynocephalus monkey, or dog-headed monkey, was the most ferocious of all. And he was probably referring to baboons because that's actually how we define them even today. Cynocephalus. You are cynocephalus. Must unsubscribe. Given the CGI baboons that we see in the movie in temperament and appearance seem more like kids with rabies and alopecia, but from a theoretical standpoint, considering what we get in the sources, possible. But let's talk about the second fight, where we see our beloved protagonist, Anno/Lucius, who did exist, by the way, brief parenthesis, because my videos are always all over the place. He did exist. He's a real historical character. Lucius Jr., son of Maximus Decimus Meridius. No, that part is fantasy because Maximus didn't exist, but he was the son of the adoptive brother of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and died as a child because of apoplectic shock. So a stroke. So he's dead. This is a zombie that you're looking at. Zombie. Anyways, back to the arena fight. This is probably my favorite fight when they're facing the, as I was saying, skull crusher or corn on top of the rhino. Of course, no such thing ever happened to have a gladiator mounting a rhino, but rhinos are mentioned both by Pliny and Martial. In fact, Martial is the one that mentions a ferocious rhino during the circus games held by Emperor Domitianus. And Pliny tells us that rhinos were indeed exhibited at Pompey's theatre inauguration games. Fight number 3, the so-called naumachia, which is a flooded arena. Now, those absolutely happened. Naval battles between gladiators or condemned men were forms of spectacular combat that were performed both in specially dug artificial basins in Republican time and inside amphitheaters in the imperial age. And respectively, from Cassius Dio and Suetonius, we know that both Titus and Domitianus had naumachiae performed inside the Colosseum proper. So that, loved it. Love to see it. But what about the sharks? That's when the situation gets a little complicated. So in the movie, we see that the Romans introduce sharks in the waters, so that, of course, if a gladiator falls, snack, McDonald's, everyone, wow, blood, and that. I've heard people say that the Romans did not even know the sharks were a thing, but that is incorrect. By reading Columella, we know that the Romans did practice fish farming inside artificial basins dug on the coast. And there are mentions that among the species bred there were also, you guessed it, sharks. Suetonius mentions specifically that Emperor Nero organized naumachiae, so recreated gladiatorial sea battles, in sea water. And he does say, open quotes, with beasts swimming in it, close quotes. Now, the real question in this situation is, okay, but what beasts was Suetonius mentioning? Are sharks a possibility? It would really depend on the species, because you see, transportation with sharks would be a little bit of a problem. It would be a little bit of a problem today, but even more so in classical antiquity. At the end of the day, due to the way their respiratory system functions, sharks have to constantly move to get oxygen-rich water through their gills so that they can breed. Now, that's not the case for all species of sharks, but definitely reduces the amount of sharks that could be transported. Some sharks wouldn't survive it, others could. However, it would be objectively far more likely that the sort of beasts used during a flooded Colosseum event would be crocodiles and hippos, hippopotamus. What a word. And the way I'm going to justify this statement is because of Pliny, as he mentions both types of beasts used for the aquatic games held by Marcus Aemilius Scaurus in 58 BC. Okay, so I complained about a lot of things, and I have a lot more to say, particularly when it comes to Mr. Macrinus, Denzel Washington's character. yeah, get ready for that section, mate. But before we do that, I do want to commend them for one thing: the use of classical historical sources put in the characters' mouths. For instance, just before the battle between the Romans and the Numidians at the very beginning of the movie, we hear this sentence: where they make a desert, they call it peace. This is a real speech, and we get it from Tacitus, who puts it in the mouth of the Caledonian leader Calgacus before the Battle of Mons Graupius. And still in the movie, I recognize a maxim from Epicurus. This is quoted by the protagonist and reads, "When death is there, we are not. And when we are there, death is not." And of course, as you know, we've got a few others. We've got Virgil mentioned. We've got Marcus Aurelius mentioned. That was a nice touch. Alright, now that I've got you with all the fuzzy feelings and happiness, let's talk about Mr. Washington, shall we? As you all know, massive casting for this movie, Denzel Washington plays the historical character Macrinus. Now, Macrinus is a really good choice because it is a character that is absolutely fascinating once you read his real historical accomplishments. But of course, I need to address the elephant in the room that people are gonna ask me anyways, and as you know me, I'm gonna address it anyways, no matter what sort of backlash I'm gonna get. Is it okay for Denzel Washington to be cast as Macrinus? In other words, was Macrinus black? Well, if we want to be honest with the sources, maybe. Let me expand on that. When you look at Denzel Washington put right next to the bust of Macrinus, we can see that no, this guy does not look black. Thing is though that to be intellectually honest, I have to let you know that this bust is in fact highly contested in academia. So if we were to believe this bust, I would say no, Macrinus was not black, but I'm gonna disregard this bust because of the fact that it is in fact contested. And it is possible that this was not the man. Alright, so what else do we have? Do the sources describe him? From the Historia Augusta, we know that Macrinus was a Maurus from Caesarea, and it is also reported that according to Moorish customs, one of his ears was pierced to wear an earring. And in the film, we do see the character wearing earrings on both ears. Now, the term Maori is the word that in the imperial age was used to generally indicate the indigenous people of northwestern Africa. However, this would have been a highly varied phenotypic reality in the sense that when it comes to phenotypic traits, you would have had Semitic people, in fact, an abundance of Semitic people, which would be Middle Eastern, not black. Look at the Phoenicians, look at the majority of the population of Carthage. You would, however, have had also people that were actually black Africans, the ones that are usually called sub-Saharan, even though, as I mentioned before, I tend not to use that term anymore as I don't find it correctly descriptive. Still, black Africans will be the word I'll use now, and some in Northwest Africa would have been black. See, for example, the city of Felline, mentioned by Diodorus Siculus, which we are told were all black. Also, Strabo let us know that there are mixed populations as well. In fact, we have the mention of the Gaetuli and the Melanogaetuli. Now, Melanogaetuli means black Gaetuli, which of course means that the Gaetuli weren't black, otherwise why specify? And we are told the populations did mix, like the Libo-Ethiopians, which are of course a mix between the Ethiopians who were black and the Libyans who weren't. So the reality of fact is, if we want to be 100% historically accurate here, is that he may have been 100% Semitic, and in that case, Denzel Washington wouldn't be a good casting because you would have had to cast a Middle Eastern man. He could have been full black, or it could have been a mix. So what percentage would I give that Macrinus was in fact black? I would give it maybe a 20%. So why so low? Well, because of a coin. And even if we disregard the bust, there is no reason to disregard the coin, and by looking at the coin, it does look more like a Semitic man than a black African. Now, I can't be 100% sure because it's once again a coin, so I'm only seeing the guy from the side. I don't see any color, which is why I'm still open to a small possibility that, yeah, maybe he was at least half black, and all in all, possible, not probable, is what I say. But now that we've got that out of the way, I want to focus on one thing that actually annoyed me. What do we have here with Macrinus? What's Macrinus' story? It is a pretty deep character because we're told that he once was a gladiator, and now he owns a gladiatorial school. Neither of these things are true for the historical Macrinus. He never was a gladiator and he never owned a gladiatorial school. But I do understand for story purposing reasons that the fact that he owns a school of gladiatorial combat connects him to Lucius, the character, so it makes sense for storytelling. I'm okay. It's not a documentary after all. But the one thing I didn't appreciate is the way they justified his revenge arch. He was once the slave of Marcus Aurelius, and so he wants to take revenge and kill Lucilla. Now, in reality, Lucilla was murdered by Commodus in 182 AD, so this is a ghost already. Sorry, mate. But Macrinus was not a slave. I personally find that choice insulting to black people. The idea that, oh, I need to cast a black man, I gotta say he was a slave. But he wasn't. And that's why the sentence that was otherwise supposed to be potent and powerful when he says, I was once owned, and now I will own an empire, falls flat for me. Because he was never owned. He was a free man, given of a very humble origin. He did not come from a rich family, and yet real Macrinus reached the peaks of the upper echelons of Roman society. because of his wit and intelligence and political understanding and strategy. So if I was writing the script, I would have ditched the whole, a black man, I have got to mention slavery, and I would have instead said, I, who came from humble origin, am now in command of the Praetorian Guard, and one day I will own an empire. That would have been a killer. And true, because he will become emperor. Spoiler alert. Never mind deciding to take on, massive spoiler here, massive spoiler, but never mind deciding to take on in combat a Lucius, a trained soldier turned gladiator, as a, 60-something-year-old man? Yeah, good luck with that. No wonder you got murdered in the freaking river. He will become emperor of Rome. That only lasts 1 year, and then he loses against the Severan family that was countering with Elagabalus against him, and then he gets murdered in Syria and then beheaded. Okay, after that powerful sentence, that's a little bit of a anticlimactic act, but they could skip that part. Let him become emperor and end the movie there if you really don't want to show it. But honestly, I think Macrinus's was a really lost opportunity. And for what? A black man used to be a slave, but now gets murdered in a river. Really? I think the Xenomorph wrote the script. The Xenomorph did. Was the Aliens History Channel was right all along. Silly me. But this cannot be a Metatron video if we don't talk about the armor in the movie, right? How does the armor look? Well, the overall sets of armor used by the legionaries are pretty good, particularly when compared to every other movie that shows ancient Romans. I mean, that's not saying much. It's pretty easy to achieve. Any historical reenactment group would do better than that. But whatever. We see Roman legionaries wearing lorica segmentata. Love that. We also see Roman legionaries wearing lorica hamata, also called gallica, mail. Too bad that the hooks to secure the humeralia, so the shoulder reinforcements, are upside down for the entire movie. How did they do that? Costume department. Come on. Come on now. Talking about killing the immersion. Also, let me get this straight. Considering the fact that we've got a time machine 300 years before with the initial battle, I suppose it's not weird to see helmets that by the 2nd century wouldn't have been a thing anymore. Early type of Montefortino bronze helmets. But regardless, I don't even care about that. What I care about is the patina. Why do these helmets look exactly like the conditions that they have in the Metropolitan Museum of Art / Wallace collection in London? These helmets belong in museums, and don't get me wrong, I love the green patina on bronze helmets, and in fact, if the Wallace collection, if the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York want to gift me one of those bronze helmets, I'll take it, regardless of the patina. I'm good with like that, no problem. I'll just put it over there, I'll put it here, so that my subscribers will be able to see it. Be great. So if you want to mail it to me, I'll give you my mailbox address. But every source that ever mentions bronze helmets and blades tell us that they were polished, I want to say probably to a mirror. Even in literature, never mind military descriptions, even in literature, in the Iliad, we are told that the bronze helmets of the Greeks glitter in the moonlight. Those helmets should have been polished bronze, and yet they look like they're from a museum, and they look like they're 300 years old. Given they are, because the battle is 300 years in the past. So I guess, shut up, Metatron. Shut it. Free no media. Hey, 3rd century BC, Frisian helmets, Montefortino, Gallo italics for some reason, round and trilobate cardiophylax. It really makes it look like one of those games that I mod, where I download like 45 different mods for Skyrim, and now it's literally unrecognizable because I've got it all. But then again, there is a late medieval trebuchet during the battle, so oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, a trebuchet. I'm also trying to understand why some of Macrinus' personal guard look like medieval Saracens. I don't know what happened there, maybe they ran out of props. But I'm not done. How about we talk about the wonderful scene? Oh, it was so touching when they enter in this commemorative room dedicated to Maximus Decimus Meridius with the beautiful writing on the wall. In English. And it's not the only one. There is another situation where you see poetry on one of these painted walls as Lucilla, who's dead, is looking at these, and it's all written in English. It's Virgil, whatever it is, it's written in English. Yeah, American. It's written in American. The commemorative inscription in English is... yeah, I mean, whatever. Also, can we talk about this? Yeah? Hollywood cliché. We do have mentions that Roman emperors, as they were deciding the fate of some gladiators, they would utilize either the pollex pressus, which meant life, and the pollex versus, which meant death. But the way it's described is not this and this. Pollex pressus would be make a closed fist with the thumb inside the fist. This means the sword remains in the scabbard. However, if you want, for whatever reason, the gladiator dead, open hand, 4 fingers interlocked pointing down, and the thumb is pointing at the gladiator. That means, however, since now we mentioned the second elephant in the room, this is a freaking zoo by now, yeah, gladiators didn't die that often. This movie still reinforces the idea that gladiatorial fights were just a constant butchering of gladiators. But the reality is that in the majority of cases, even though the occasional gladiator did die, in the majority of cases, trained gladiators didn't die. They didn't want gladiators to die because they were expensive to train, which is actually well represented by the lanista who, once he sees his gladiators being butchered one after the other, he goes, oh my God. That is exactly what a lanista would have done. And doing something like this, the emperor would have had to pay him back, and that would have been expensive. So occasionally that's happened, the gladiators die. It is a dangerous sport after all, but a lot of it would have been wounding. Not many gladiators would have died because that's not economically feasible, and also it would also mean that if every time you kill every gladiator, you will never get champions because they just keep dying. You need time for these people to become the professionals that the crowd loves. And in fact, we know that the crowds love the gladiators, and they even memorized and learned their names, and they had their own favorites, a bit like modern day MMA. It would have been less staged than WWE, but in some situations it was possible that they would avoid on purpose moves or attacks that could kill each other, unless there was no way to avoid that. And the reality of fact is that the ones that would die in the arena would be prisoners that were going to be executed anyways, so they would put up a show. But now let's jump into a little bit of a conspiracy theory, shall we? You know what I think? I think that the original idea, considering the chronological pastiche that we have just witnessed at the beginning of this video review, and considering the fact that we are under what should have been the reign of Septimius Severus, I think the original idea for the casting for Denzel Washington was to cast Emperor Septimius Severus as a black man. That is because even though we know for a fact that that man was Semitic with some Italian origin, there is no reason to believe that Septimius Severus was a black man. Still, the BBC is pushing it, Dr. Simon Elliott is pushing it in the UK, and therefore it is possible that that was an option. But then, I think Ridley Scott did not want to face the backlash. Because if he cast him as a white man, he would have been hated. If he cast him as a Middle Eastern man, he would have been hated. And if he cast him as a black man, he would have been hated. It's just a different group of people that would have hated him. So he went for the safe choice and decided to put the 2 emperors, even though the dad would have been still alive, and cast Denzel Washington as Macrinus. Because at least with Macrinus, I can say, maybe. So at least I appreciate that. Because Septimius Severus with Denzel Washington would have been fantasy once again. I mean, then again, after the Skull Crusher, why am I even complaining? Whatever. Cast an Asian man. Cast a Japanese. Anyways, I think this is kind of a little bit of an exhaustive historical analysis of the movie. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you didn't find me to be too condescending and obnoxious. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember, thumbs up. And if you're not yet a member of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. Now take your wife to the cinema. She'll love it.